They say grief brings people closer. That funerals heal old wounds and that death somehow makes the living appreciate each other more. But that's not always true. Sometimes grief doesn't bring healing. It brings exposure. Like a floodlight shining into dark corners you didn't even know existed. It's been 6 months since we laid my mother to rest. 6 months since I watched the only woman who ever truly understood me disappear under a sea of roses and tears and silence. I remember the sky that day, gray, not dramatic, just blank. Like even the clouds didn't know what to say. And in that silence, something shifted in my father. Or maybe it didn't shift. Maybe it had always been there, and I just hadn't noticed. But suddenly, the way he looked at me, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the way a father looks at his daughter. It was like he was seeing someone else entirely. Maybe it was the way I started wearing her perfume to feel close to her again. Maybe it was the way I filled her spot at the dinner table, cooked the meals, folded his clothes, held space for his grief because no one else would. Or maybe it was something darker. You ever feel someone watching you, not in a creepy way at first, but in a way that makes your skin itch, like your body knows something your heart refuses to admit? That was me. I'd come home from work, and he'd already have dinner ready. He'd pour me a glass of wine, Mom's favorite. He'd say things like, "You remind me of her more and more every day." And at first, it felt sweet. But then his eyes would linger too long. His hand would rest on my shoulder just a second too much. He started calling me darling, a word he hadn't used since I was 6. I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just lonely. Maybe grief was making everything feel heavier, weirder. But then came the night I can't forget. The night that changed everything. The night he said something I still haven't told anyone. You ever experienced something so twisted, so confusing, that your mind splits in two? One part screaming, "This is wrong," the other whispering, "But he's all you've got now?" Yeah, that's where this story begins. And trust me, what happened after my mother died? It wasn't closure. It wasn't healing. It was a different kind of grief. One that no one warns you about. One that doesn't come with condolences or casseroles. So stay with me. Because this story, this truth, it'll make you question what love looks like when it's broken. What loneliness sounds like when it's dressed in comfort. And what you'd do if the one person you were supposed to trust the most looked at you in a way that made your soul step back. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones we live through. They're the ones we never saw coming. I was 25 when it happened. I had my own place. A small studio apartment with creaky floors and chipped paint, but it was mine. I had a job that didn't pay much, but gave me something to wake up for. Then my mother got sick. The kind of sick you don't come back from. And when she passed, I didn't even think. I packed my bags, left everything behind, and moved back home. Not because my father asked. He never did. He just stood there at the funeral, blank-faced, looking lost in a suit that hung too loose on him. I told myself he needed me. But maybe I needed to feel needed. The house hadn't changed. Same wallpaper. Same dusty photo frames. My old bedroom still had the faded posters I taped to the wall at 16. The living room still smelled like the lavender candles Mom used to light in the evenings. Except now they stayed unlit. The first week we barely spoke. He'd nod at me when I passed by, say thanks when I cooked. I thought, this is just grief. He's always been quiet. Growing up, he wasn't cruel. Just unavailable. He'd come home from work, drop his keys in the bowl, eat dinner in silence, and disappear behind the newspaper. When I got my period at 12, it was Mom who showed me how to handle the stains. When I cried after a breakup, it was Mom who rubbed my back while I sobbed into her lap. Dad didn't do emotions, didn't do closeness. He existed in his own bubble of work and TV and strict routines. But after she died, he started showing up. Not in the way I expected. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't say, "I miss her too." Instead, He sat beside me on the couch. He'd stare at the same old photo albums like he was trying to reach through the pages. Sometimes he'd cry. Sometimes he'd just watch me. And I didn't know what to do with that. I was used to being invisible to him. I wasn't prepared to be seen. I remember one night, I made spaghetti. Something simple. He took a bite and looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother made it better." I waited for the insult. But he smiled. Still, it's nice to have someone cook for me again. I looked down at my plate and felt a strange warmth. And that scared me. Because it wasn't joy. It wasn't comfort. It was recognition. Like I was slowly becoming someone I didn't mean to be. Like I was stepping into her shadow, wearing her role without even knowing it. I started to notice the things he noticed. When I wore her old sweater one night, he touched the sleeve and whispered, "She loved this color on you." When I brushed my hair at the kitchen table, he said, "Your mother used to do that right there." He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't cold. He was present. Too present. And somewhere between grief and silence, between the casserole dishes from neighbors and the sleepless nights, I stopped feeling like a daughter and started feeling like something else. But I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. Because I thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. A part of me craved the attention. I hated myself for that. But when you've spent your life being ignored, even the wrong kind of attention feels like water to someone who's been starving in a desert. The house got quieter, but the tension got louder. And in the stillness, I started remembering things. Not clear moments, just fragments. Like the way he used to look at my mother when he thought no one was watching. Or the way she'd flinch when he entered a room too fast. The way she always smiled a little too tightly when he touched her in public. I had questions, but no one left to ask. So I kept cooking. I kept folding his laundry. I kept sitting with him on the couch when he asked. And every day, the line between us blurred a little more. Until one day, it disappeared entirely. It was a Thursday night. The kind of night where everything felt heavier than usual. The air had that stillness to it, like the walls were holding their breath. I'd just come out of the shower, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing one of Mom's old robes. I didn't mean to wear it, it was just there, hanging on the back of the door. I reached for it without thinking. The house was dark except for the faint yellow light glowing from the living room. I thought maybe he'd gone to bed. But then I heard it, quiet, muffled, almost unrecognizable. Crying. I peeked around the corner. He was sitting on the couch, hunched over, his elbows on his knees, staring at something in his hands. A photo. The one from their wedding, Mom in her ivory dress, eyes full of laughter, and him standing beside her, young, proud, and smiling in a way I never remembered seeing in real life. He didn't notice me at first. His shoulders were shaking, and I could hear his breath catching in his throat. I froze. Part of me wanted to walk away, give him space. Another part just wanted to be close. So I stepped in. "Dad?" He looked up, eyes glassy, cheeks wet, voice small. "I miss her so much." I nodded. "Me too." He patted the seat beside him. "Sit with me." So I did. For a while, we just sat there in silence. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint hum of the fridge, the soft rasp of his breathing. Then, out of nowhere, he reached for my hand. At first, it felt comforting, familiar. His hand was warm, a little rough. But then, he didn't let go. He held it tighter. Stroked the back of my palm with his thumb. And that's when I felt it, this weird, cold twinge in my chest. Like something was off, but I didn't know why. He looked at me. Not just looked. He saw me. And not in the way a father sees his daughter. Something else. Something I couldn't unsee once I saw it. "You remind me so much of her," he said softly. He gave a weak smile. "Sometimes, it feels like she never left." I swallowed hard. There was a weight in the room now. A stillness that didn't feel sacred anymore. It felt stuck. I forced a laugh, tried to shift the air. Maybe it's the robe, I said. She used to wear it every night. But he didn't laugh. He just kept staring. Like he was lost in some memory. Or worse, trying to recreate one. I pulled my hand away gently, stood up, mumbled something about needing to dry my hair. He nodded, didn't stop me. Just kept looking down at that photo. I went in my room and shut the door. Sat on the bed, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. I told myself grief makes people strange. That he didn't mean anything by it. That I was overthinking. But my skin didn't believe me. It tingled, like it had been touched the wrong way. I lay there that night, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that nothing happened. But something did. Something small. Something quiet. Something that cracked open the ground beneath us, just enough for the fall to begin. I lay awake that night, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it held some kind of answer. It didn't. The next morning, I acted like everything was fine. Made breakfast. Washed the dishes. Sat across from him at the table like nothing had happened. He didn't mention it either. Didn't say a word about the photo, or my hand, or the look that still burned at the back of my mind. But something had shifted. I could feel it. It was in the way he spoke to me. Softer. Sweeter. Like he was trying to fill a space that wasn't his to fill. And it was in the way I reacted. I started putting on makeup in the mornings, just a little. Started brushing my hair before dinner. Started choosing my clothes more carefully, nothing too tight, but nothing too plain either. And I hated myself for it. Because I didn't know who I was trying to please. I told myself it was just routine. Something to feel normal. But the truth was uglier than that. I was seeking something. Validation. Comfort. A sense of being seen by the man who had spent my entire childhood looking right through me. My father was never affectionate. Not once do I remember him hugging me without my mom nudging him. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't sit at my recitals or tuck me in. He existed around me, not with me. And my mom, she tried. She filled in the silence. Covered the distance. She made excuses for him. Your dad's just tired. Your dad doesn't know how to show it, but he cares. Don't take it personally. So I learned not to take anything personally. I learned how to walk on eggshells so well I stopped noticing the cracks in my own steps. And now here he was seeing me. Too much. Too often. I found myself holding my breath when we passed in the hallway. Flinching when he got too close. But then feeling guilty about it. Because he wasn't doing anything, was he? He wasn't touching me like that. He wasn't saying anything outright. But it was in the pauses. The lingering glances. The quiet. It was in the way he looked at my legs when I sat down. In the way his eyes followed me when I got up from the couch. I'd catch him staring and he'd smile like nothing was wrong. Like it was normal. And I smiled back. Because I didn't know what else to do. I told myself he was grieving. That he missed her. That I was imagining things. But I wasn't. Not really. I just didn't want to face it. There were nights I stood in the shower, scrubbing my skin until it stung. Not because he touched me, but because it felt like he had, even when he hadn't. That's the worst part. The not knowing. The wondering if you're losing your mind or if you've just finally started seeing clearly. I'd sit in my room, staring at the door, listening for his footsteps. Sometimes I locked it. Sometimes I didn't. And every time I didn't, I hated myself for wondering if he'd come in. Not because I wanted him to, but because some twisted part of me needed to know. To prove that the fear wasn't just in my head. That it had roots. That it came from somewhere. The house felt colder now. But not because of the weather. Because of the space between what we said and what we didn't. I felt like I was waiting for something to happen. And I didn't know whether I wanted it to or not. That was the worst kind of guilt. Not for doing something, but for feeling something. Something you can't explain. Something you wish you could rip out of your chest and bury with the rest of the grief. But you can't. You live with it. And pretend the silence isn't suffocating. It started with dinner. One night, I came home late from a long shift. I was tired, hungry, worn down in that quiet way grief eats at you. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant. And there he was, in the kitchen, cooking. The table was already set. 2 plates. My favorite wine. He'd made roast chicken, just like Mom used to. The smell hit me like a memory I wasn't ready for. He smiled when I walked in. "There she is," he said. "Took you long enough." It sounded like something a husband would say, not a father. I brushed it off, sat down, ate, and then the compliments started. "You look good," he said, after a long pause. "That dress, you wear it better than your mother ever did." I froze. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. He laughed like it was nothing, like he hadn't just cracked open the floor beneath me. I forced a smile, changed the subject, tried to pretend it was a slip, a weird thing said in passing. But it didn't stop. The next few days were full of more small moments. He started sitting closer on the couch, close enough that our arms brushed. Close enough that I could smell the cologne he only used on anniversaries. He asked questions he never cared about before. "What time do you get home? Who were you texting? You going out in that?" It wasn't concern. It was attention. Possessive. Personal. One evening we were watching a movie, some old black and white thing he used to love. He poured me another glass of wine, laughed at a scene, then leaned closer. And without warning, he put his hand on my thigh. Not just a touch, not a fatherly pat. His fingers stayed there. Warm, heavy, too still. My body tensed. I flinched. He looked at me, apologized softly, said sorry. I wasn't thinking, but he didn't move his hand. He left it there, resting, like we were something we weren't. I wanted to scream. I didn't. I stood up, mumbled something about needing to sleep, walked away so fast I nearly knocked the wine glass over. That night, I locked my bedroom door. And I hated myself for it. Because locking it meant I didn't feel safe. And that meant admitting something was wrong. I didn't sleep. I lay there, heart racing, listening to every creak in the floorboards. Every shift in the air felt like a warning. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? What would I even say? My father touched my thigh. My father said I looked better than my mother. My father's eyes feel wrong. It sounds small, harmless, like I'm overreacting. And maybe I am. But then again, maybe I'm not. Because my body is remembering things my mind buried. Flashes. Mom flinching at his touch. Me walking into a room and feeling tension without understanding it. Mom saying, "Go to your room," every time he came home angry. I never asked questions. And now I don't know if I want the answers. One memory hit me out of nowhere. I was maybe 8, sitting at the kitchen table, drawing. He came home. I looked up. He looked at me. And I remember, his eyes lingered. Too long. I didn't know what it meant then. Now, I'm not so sure. I pushed it away. Told myself it didn't happen. That memory's tricky. But my body remembers. The way I shrink when he enters the room now. The way I instinctively put a pillow between us when we sit. I started going out more. Coming home later. Pretending I had plans when I didn't. But the house is still mine too. And he's still there. Always watching. Always waiting for something I don't understand. Or maybe I do. And I'm just too scared to name it. It was raining that night. Not just a drizzle. A storm. The kind that shakes windows and makes the lights flicker like they're holding on for dear life. I was in the kitchen, trying to finish the dishes when the power finally gave out. Everything went black. Just like that. No TV hum. No refrigerator buzz. Just the sound of rain hammering the roof and the occasional groan of the wind pushing against the walls. I found some candles in the drawer. Lit 3. The flame flickered, casting shadows that made the house look older, sadder. I walked into the living room. Stopped. He was standing there. In the hallway. Still. Quiet. Barely more than a silhouette. But I could feel his eyes. Even in the dark. I didn't speak. Neither did he. The candle in my hand trembled slightly, the wax already pooling near my fingers. And then his voice low, hoarse, tired. "You're all I have now." I didn't answer. My breath caught. He stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch part of his face. "You understand me," he said. "Not like your mother. She never really saw me." I stood there, frozen. My body screaming at me to move, to run, to disappear into the dark. But my feet, they stayed planted. I wanted to say, "That's not true." I wanted to say, "She loved you." I wanted to say, "I'm your daughter." But all I managed was silence. He took another step forward. The air between us grew heavy, thick like smoke. Hot, with something unspoken and completely wrong. I saw his hand lift, slowly, like it was caught in hesitation, reaching for my face. And then it happened. Before he could touch me, I said it. "Don't." It came out louder than I expected. Sharp, cracked, raw. It echoed, bounced off the walls and hit us both. He froze. His hand dropped. His eyes widened, just slightly. And then, he turned, without a word, walked away, down the hall, into his room. Door shut. No slam. Just the soft click of a man retreating into silence. And I stood there, candle still burning, hand still shaking, alone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there. Because I knew. I knew the line we'd been dancing around for weeks had finally shown its face. And I had drawn it. Clear. Sharp. Final. But the damage was already done. The next morning, he made coffee like always. Poured mine. Didn't look at me. Didn't speak. Neither did I. We moved around each other like ghosts. Like two people who had lived 1,000 years in a single second, and now had nothing left to say. But everything had changed. Even the silence sounded different. Colder. Real. Because now we both knew there was no pretending anymore. No brushing it off as grief. No hiding behind the ache of loss. We had reached the edge. And I had finally said no. But deep down, I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't. The silence didn't go away. It grew. It stretched itself across the walls, wrapped around the furniture, slipped between the floorboards. He stopped speaking to me. Stopped looking at me. And somehow, that hurt more than everything that came before. He'd wake up before me, leave coffee on the counter, then vanish into the garage or the back porch. Dinner became a quiet affair. 2 plates, 2 people, no words. Sometimes I'd forget he was even in the house until I heard the pipes creak or a door close softly behind me. The warmth that once made me doubt myself, his sudden presence, the attention, the smiles, was gone. And in its place was something colder than absence. Avoidance. I found myself pacing the hallway at night, staring at my packed suitcase like it was a betrayal. I'd fold clothes, then unfold them. I'd check the bus schedule, then close the tab. I'd picture myself walking out the front door and never looking back. Then I'd remember the man I used to call Dad. The one who never hugged me. The one I still wanted to protect. And that confused me more than anything else. How do you leave someone who already left you years ago and only just now started reaching for you in the wrong way? One morning, I got a text from my cousin. "You doing okay? You've been distant." I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed, "Yeah, just tired." Deleted it. Typed, "It's been weird since Mom died." Deleted that too. I wanted to say something real. But where do you begin? How do you say, "My father touched me wrong without touching me wrong"? How do you explain the kind of pain that leaves no bruise? I put the phone down, walked into my room, and that's when I saw the note. Folded neatly, placed right on top of my pillow. His handwriting. Slanted. Careful. I stared at it for what felt like forever before picking it up. I'm sorry for confusing grief with love. That's all it said. No name, no signature, no explanation. Just those 7 words. And yet, it said everything. I sank onto the bed, note trembling in my hands. And, for the first time in weeks, I cried. Not just for what almost happened, but for what had already been broken long before that night. For the little girl who spent her life waiting to be seen. For the father who only learned how to reach when he was drowning. And for the twisted, blurry line between comfort and craving that neither of us knew how to untangle. I didn't speak to him that night. I didn't need to. His words were enough. And also, not enough at all. Because nothing can unmake what's already been felt. Nothing can return me to the version of myself that existed before the silence turned sharp. Before love got confused with longing. Before the grief swallowed us both and left us reaching in the dark for something that should have never been touched. I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The walls were the same. The little stickers I once pressed onto my dresser were still there, faded, peeling at the edges. The closet door still creaked like it used to when I'd hide in it during thunderstorms. But the girl who once lived here, she didn't exist anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the ceiling like I used to do when I was 15 and convinced the world didn't understand me. Back then, my pain was simple, predictable. Grades, friends, first crushes. Now, the pain had no shape, no name, only weight. A kind of heaviness that clung to my skin, that filled the air, the corners, the silence. I thought about everything, every glance, every word. Every time I told myself it's not that bad. I thought about my mother. How she smiled even when her eyes looked tired. How she always filled the gaps, softened the sharp edges of this house. How I never asked what she was hiding behind her warmth. Maybe she lived through her own version of this. Maybe that's why she tried so hard to make everything feel normal. Maybe normal wasn't what she wanted. Maybe it was just what she needed to survive. I wondered if I was becoming her, or if I already had. I stared at the note again. I'm sorry for confusing grief with love. And I wondered, was that really what it was? Just grief? Just confusion? Or was that just the version that's easier to live with? Because if it was more than that, if it was something darker, something older, something learned, then what does that say about him? And what does it say about me for staying? I thought about the night it happened. The storm. The candle. His voice when he said, "You're all I have now." And I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. Was I wrong to stay silent? Was I wrong to walk away quietly instead of shouting, instead of telling someone, instead of naming it for what it almost became? But then again, was I wrong to want to leave? To think about packing my bags, walking out, and never looking back, knowing he'd be alone in this house filled with dust and ghosts and regret? The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I'm both. Wrong for staying. Wrong for leaving. Or maybe I'm neither. Maybe I'm just human. A daughter who wanted to be loved. A woman trying to survive what no one prepares you for. Because there's no manual for this. No handbook for when grief and attention twist themselves into something you can't name. There's no easy answer when the person who's supposed to protect you becomes the source of your confusion. So I sat there in the same room where I once practiced spelling words, dreamed about boys I'd never meet, cried into my pillow about silly things. And I let myself feel it. All of it. The ache. The shame. The longing. The anger. The questions that had no answers. Because sometimes that's the only way to move forward. To sit in the wreckage and admit this happened. And I'm still here. Have you ever been needed so deeply that it didn't feel like love anymore? It felt like a trap, wrapped in tenderness, drenched in grief, and whispered in a voice that once sounded like home. Because that's what it was. It wasn't passion. It wasn't comfort. It was need, twisted into something that looked like closeness, but wasn't. He said I understood him. He said I was all he had. But I think what he really meant was he didn't know how to be alone with his pain. And somehow I became the softest place for it to land. Not because I invited it, but because I didn't run fast enough. Because I didn't know how. So now I'm asking you. Was I wrong for what I did next? Was I wrong for packing my bags without telling him? For getting on that bus and leaving the house before sunrise without goodbye, without a note, without looking back? Or was I just trying to breathe again? Trying to be a daughter without becoming a substitute? Trying to mourn my mother without being molded into her ghost? Maybe you felt that before. Maybe not in this way, but in your own. Maybe someone leaned on you too hard, held you too tightly, needed you in ways that left you empty. And maybe you didn't know how to say no because it didn't look like danger. It looked like love. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever been caught between guilt and survival, between staying quiet and saving yourself, tell me. Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Like this story? Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where silence turns into stories that demand to be heard. Tap the bell. The next one might echo a truth you've never dared to say aloud. Some boundaries aren't crossed in a single moment. They fade, little by little, over years of silence, unmet needs, and things we were too afraid to speak. Sometimes it doesn't start with a touch. Sometimes it starts with a look, a word, a need that doesn't belong to you, but ends up on your shoulders anyway. And sometimes, the people we trust to protect us, the ones who are supposed to hold us safe, they're the ones who leave the deepest cracks. Cracks that no one sees, that don't bruise, that don't bleed, but they echo loud, forever. If you're grieving, if you're lost, if you're trying to hold everyone together while falling apart inside, hold space for your pain. Feel it, name it, but don't let it blur the lines of who you are. You are not a replacement. You are not a shadow. You are not a cure for someone else's loneliness. You are not wrong for wanting to feel seen, but you deserve to be seen right. Because healing doesn't begin in someone else's arms. It begins the moment you stop confusing attention with love and start choosing yourself even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.